Welcome to Lesson 6 in the ASP.NET MVC UI add-on course. In this lesson, we're going to tackle creating that Create Team form, or what would be a form, only it's a web page now, or a series of web pages. So let's look over here at our Visual Studio, and we have our Create Team form in the WinForms application. Now remember in our last video, we created this right here, this Add New Member. Now that that's done, we can concentrate on this button down here that says Create Team. And all it really does is it takes the team name and the people in the team and creates a team. In fact, let's look at it. This is all that happens. We create a new team model. We populate the team name and the team members, which is a list. After that, we call the Create Team, and we're done. So that's all there really is to creating a team. So let's create that inside of ASP.NET. Now, just like with our people, we don't just create the team, we also have a view of the available teams as well. So let's start by creating a controller for our teams. Now, you don't have to create a controller for every single thing you do, but it really is convenient and it really does fit with the scheme. Because don't forget, our URL is our website path / say people / index or / create or / edit. Well, that makes no sense if you can edit a team or a person inside of the people controller. And so we really try and keep those controllers to be as separate as possible, where a controller does one set of things or operates on one piece of data essentially. And so we have a people controller that just deals with people, the CRUD action, create, read, update, delete. And we'll do the same thing with our teams. So let's right click on the controller and say add controller. And we're going to do let's do a read write action again, but we'll still be deleting most of this stuff. We could do an empty controller and just simulate the same thing as what we did in the people controllers, kind of copy and paste the things and change the names. But I'd rather start this way and then delete stuff. It's much easier to delete things than it is to create things. We'll call this the teams controller. I'm going with a plural naming convention, so plural, teams, people, and all the rest. It's really up to you if you decide you want to go a singular, person, team, so on and so forth. That really is a preference thing. Different people have different best practices on that. In this one, we're just going to go with plural. So I don't really see a need to go a different route. All right, so we don't need a details view. We do need a create. We do need a post for that create. We don't have an ability to edit a team, so we can get rid of that. And also the post for the edit. And we don't have the ability to delete a team. And that's probably a good thing because, like I said, it'd be a mess to try and delete a team if it's possibly in use and checking all that out and making sure that a tournament's complete. And even so, if it's complete, how do you do that? So we're just going to leave that alone and say that you can't delete a team. So we have the index action, which just returns a list of teams. That's our list. And then we have our create action. So what do we need to return a list of? Well, it's a list of teams. So let's come down here to the Tournament Tracker UI and look at the Create Tournament form at the code behind, because in here it captures or grabs the list of available teams. So we're just going to copy that code and we're going to put that in here in our list. And we'll have to do the control dots to bring this in. And there we go. So now we have a list of let's call it all teams instead of available teams. So here's a list of all of our teams, and we'll pass that through to the view. And now we'll create this view. So we'll right-click on index, say add view. We'll leave it as index. We'll change this to be a list, and we'll set the model up to be the team model. The rest stays the same. We hit OK. And there we go. Now we have our list, and let's call this, instead of index, we'll call this all teams. We'll leave the create link there, but what we won't have is our edit, details, and delete. We don't need those. So we'll delete out that, and also the header record that was associated with it. And now if we run this, just to make sure it works, let's see what we get. Okay, so here's all of our teams. Team name, first place, or team first place, Uncanny Losers, Sue's team, Greg's team, and Mary's team. Not exactly a mind-blowing list here. It's just a list of the teams we have. So that's good. Here's our header. It says team name all crunched together. We can fix that. We know how to do that. That's just one of those metadata pieces that goes over the top of that column. So that's good, but it only has a team name and not all the people associated with that team. So let's look at what we can do to fix that. So if we look at what the team model is, we'll hit F12 here. We have a team name. ID by default in MVC gets hidden, and that's a good thing. We don't need to see the ID for the team. Well, actually, it's going to throw an error right here. And this is one of those quirks with Razor you have to work through. I believe the fix for this is actually to wrap this and say, yes, it's Razor, and then wrap it inside of parens. Let's give that a shot. So now it's saying, yes, this right here is C#, but we want to output it finally as Razor, as HTML. So let's just give this a shot, just see if it works, and then we'll work on see if we can't clean that up a bit. So here we have, first of all, team name has a space in it, and now we have Tim Corey, comma, Sue Storm, and there's a comma at the end, whereas down here it just says Sue Storm, comma. So we do have the idea of a list, a comma-separated list of the people that are associated with that team. So to clean this up, we really want to know which item is either the first or the last item in our list, because then we can either have the comma space first, or we can take the comma off the end. And so what I mean is, maybe if we know the first one, we just write the name. But if it's not the first one, we write comma, space, and then the name. That way we always have a comma space in the next item all the way through to the end. But the first one doesn't have that comma space at the very beginning. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is knowing the very end item and then not writing the comma if it's the very end item. And ironically, the easier way of doing things is knowing which one is the first one. And so we're going to change this a bit. So I'll write it up above just so we can kind of have that this model down here and know what we're trying to do. So we'll say at 4, and we'll say var, we'll say int I, if I can type, equals 0. I is less than item.teammembers.count, and I plus plus. So now we're going to do a 4 instead of a for each. And now we can say if I equals 0. That way we know it's the first item in the list. We're going to say is at p dot, oops, not p, we don't have p, because that's down here in our for each. Instead, at item.teammembers bracket I dot full name. Otherwise, in the else statement, we're going to have at item dot, actually first we're going to have double quotes, comma, space, double quotes, plus item dot team members. And that's I in those square brackets dot full name. All right, so that's our if statement now. Hopefully that should work. Let's take this out and find out. All right, so that worked. There are no commas here in these three, but in these two, there's a comma after Tim Corey and after Joe Smith. So that's perfect. So because we needed to know the first or the last, this is very easy to know the first because we start at 0. And so checking to see if it's 0 is very easy to do. So we check to see if it's 0. If it is, just write the full name. But otherwise, go ahead and write the comma space and then the full name. So there's our for each to give us our team members. Now up here, let's go ahead and add our th. And we'll do at html.display name for model equals greater than model dot, and instead of team name, we're going to say model dot team members. All right, and IntelliSense wasn't working well for me there, but it seems to have picked it up. And probably the reason why is because we use model and like that, where I believe this might work a little better. Nope, it does not. It's one of those things you kind of poke around and figure out what's working and what doesn't work. In that case, that seems to work. Let's see if it actually runs. Wait for us to load. And it does say team members. So that's good. So at least it works, even though IntelliSense kind of broke down there for us and didn't give us what we really wanted. But we know which property to grab. Now we can come over to the team model, go to F12, to actually get to it, take this display name, and above team members, we should say at least, give a space, or call it team member list. Maybe it's a little more descriptive. And now that should show up in our index instead of just saying team members with no space. It should actually say team member list and gives Microsoft's guideline, index, create, delete, edit, display. Then the templates you can use are create, delete, details, edit, list. It's pretty much the same. That's one of the benefits of following convention. So now for our model class, let's select the team model. And the rest stay the same. So we have a create template called create with the team model as the model to create. We add, and there we go. We can call this create new team. It has the anti-forgery token, which we didn't cover yet. I'll put that on this one just so you can see it, and I'll retroactively put it on the people controller. It really is just one decorator, and that's it. So we have that. And now down here, if we kind of look at this from a HTML perspective instead of trying to look at the page itself, we see that we have just one entry here. We have the team name, and that's really it. It's all it shows us because it doesn't know what to do with that list. Just like it didn't know what to do displaying that list, it doesn't know what to do with editing that list. And that's okay because we actually have to make a modification and create our own model because it really is a little bit different than what we're expecting here. We have to make a new model to hold some new information. And here's why. We're very used to, in WinForms, dealing with lists. We bind them to a list box or a combo box, and we can do multi-select out of there. We can move from one list to another and all the rest. MVC, not so comfortable that way. And so it doesn't have great controls to do that. So what I want to do, and let's just boot this up just so you can see it. What I want to do is I want to have the name of the team be displayed. And you can edit that. You can put your own value in there. And then, just like right here, but then I want to see a checkbox list of all the available people. That way, you can select as many people as you want very easily. You can't double select people. And you just check the ones you want, you hit create, and you're good to go. counts as the MVC version of this model, not the team model from the class library. Now inside here, we can actually grab the information from the team model. So let's go hit F12 on a team model to pull that up. We can grab this information right here, so a team name, and let's actually even call it team members. So we'll Control C on this. We'll paste this in. We'll even leave the modifiers here. We'll do our Control dot to bring that in. But instead of a list of person model, it's going to be a list of select list item. We'll hit Control dot to add the using system.web.mvc. So that's something that comes right with MVC. So now we have a team name and the list of team members. Now if we look at this select list item, it's got 5 properties in here. Is it disabled? We'll ignore that. The select list group that it's in, we'll ignore that. Selected, it's a Boolean. We will ignore that, but that's what the checkbox will use to say it's selected or it's not when we submit the form. Then we have a string called text and a string called value. So a text is what gets displayed on the page. The value, which is a string, that value represents the item. So in this case, we use our ID for that. Now our ID is an int, so we'll have to cast it from a string back to an int to get it out, but that's okay. So there's our list of select list item. And we're going to map our team model over to this team MVC model for our create page. And so I should make a modification on the create page to take the team MVC model instead. And so instead of tracker library, we're going to have the MVC UI .models.team MVC model. So that's the model we're going to use. So everything else should stay the same because it didn't have that list yet for the checkboxes. But that takes care of that. And now over here in the controller, we have to actually change how we send information back. And we'll get to that in a minute. That's not really a big deal yet. But for now, let's create a new list of type person model, and we'll call this people. And we'll say this equals, we're actually going to go ahead and grab all the people, and let's go over to our people controller and just grab the get person all. We'll come back over our team controller and we'll just paste that in. All right, there we go. So now we've got a list of all of our people, and now we can create a new team MVC model. We'll do Control dot there, add the using statement, and we'll say this is our, let's call it input equals new team MVC model. Now we don't normally have to pass in a new model for the create action, but we are going to pass one in for this one, a blank one. And the reason why is because it won't be fully blank. The team name, that's going to be blank. But the list of people, we have to populate that so that the checkbox list is there. So we have a list of who is available. And so we're going to say that the right here, the input dot team members equals, now the problem is we can't say people. That won't work because team members is a list of select list item. People is a list of person model. But fortunately, we have link, and link is amazing. We can say dot select. All right. Then we say X, we say equals greater than, we can say new select list item, curly braces, We'll create a new object for each person in this people list. And we'll say that the text equals x dot full name. So that's what's going to display. And the value equals x dot ID. We'll have to say dot toString because ID is actually an int. And before you panic, it's saying, oh no, it's all red. Don't worry. That's because select returns an IEnumerable, and we want a list. Dot to list. And there we go. So now, in one line, we've taken our list of type person model and converted over to a list of select list item and populated all the values. So now we're good to go. So now we can pass this input to our view. Now on our view side, we can start using this select list item. So let's go over to create. The one problem here, and this is the reason why I keep closing these tabs out, this create looks the same as the people create, which looks the same as every other create. So that can be a little confusing. If you mouse over, it does tell you the full path, but that's kind of a pain to look at. My recommendation is only open up one set of CRUD tabs at a time. So don't have two creates open at the same time, if you can help it. So here we have our form. So you have begin form, it's all the way through the end form right here. We have a submit, and we have this form group it shows us, and then it has a label for, and then it has the values. So let's do the same exact thing. Control dash label call dash MD dash 2. So we're just copying this line right here. That's all we're doing. So now we have our section that is the 2 columns wide, and it has the label for this section. Now we want to put the actual values. So let's do a for each on our list. So we say for each. Let's actually do an at for each var item. If you don't already have that for each somewhere else, you gotta be careful of that. If you don't have it twice, especially if it's nested. It wouldn't be a problem if they were on the same level, but if one was nested inside another and you overwrote the name, that could be a problem. So it should prompt you, but you never know with the way Razor and HTML and C# all kind of fit together in these forms. IntelliSense and our notifications can be a bit temperamental at times. It's gotten a whole lot better as we've progressed down the MVCs. So MVC 2 was quirky. 3 was a lot more stable. Now we're on 5. This is what we're working on right now. And it's a lot more stable, but there's still some quirks there. So do everything you can to avoid a possible quirk by not running into those kind of things. So make sure that you check for, am I already using items somewhere else? So var item in model dot team members. And now we'll do our curly braces and say for each one of these, we want a div with a class equal to checkbox. And this is a a thing for Bootstrap. Bootstrap applies certain styles to checkboxes. We'll give it a label. And then inside there, we'll have input type equals checkbox. Then we have a name. Now, this is something we've not provided yet. I gotta go back and actually append our model. And the reason why is because it actually creates a separate output variable that holds all the selected items. So we'll need to make sure we modify that. So we'll leave it blank for now, or maybe we'll even call it selected team members. And we'll just call that property that. So then the value equals, we need to do at item dot, and we need the value. And we'll do a slash, close the sign, and say at item dot text. So what's going to happen here is the way checkboxes work, and you can look this up in the getbootstrap.com and go to CSS and look at the form section. There's one for checkbox. We have the label, and that wraps the entire thing. And then we have at one point the input. Now the input is just that little box. So this says in that little box, it's a checkbox. It gets assigned to selected team members. And the value for this particular checkbox, because we're looping through, so there's lots of these, but for each particular one, the value is the item.value. And that's whatever you put in the value column, which in our case was the ID. Now it's still a text instead of an int, but or string instead of an int, but that's okay. We can convert it back. So that's this right here is that little box, that little checkbox. But next to it, on its right, we have a space, and then we have item.text. And that tells us whatever we want to display to the end user. In this case, it'd be the full name of the individual. So that should work. It should show us the full names of every person with a checkbox next to them. But let's create this selected team members first. We'll copy this. I'll go back to our team MVC model. We're going to add a new property, a list of type string. So let's grab the team MVC model and call that the model. That way we know what's going on. We can actually put our breakpoint here just so we can see it. That's all we care about is actually inspecting it. So we can hit run this, and I actually should have gone back to my create page because now I have to go to the teams page, and then from there I have to go to create new team. So let's do that. Go to teams, create new, and now look at that. We have a checkbox list, which right now is kind of ugly, but it has a list of people that I can select for my team, including that blank person I haven't gotten rid of yet. So if I do that and go wacky team for the team name and hit create, let's look at this model. Mouse over it, open it up. I have a team name of wacky team. I have no team members. They don't get passed back, but I do have 5 selected team members and they are items 1, 2, 5, 7, and 9. So that's good. So that's exactly what we want. So we know at least we're getting the information back out. Now let's look at why that layout was as squirrely as it was. And I think the issue here is how we're doing this layout. And so what's happening is this right here gets a column of medium page size 2. So we have 10 to use. We don't actually assign another column. So let's actually cut this out. We have surround with. We do. Imagine that. Surround with. We're going to surround with let's go to HTML. See if we can do this. There should be a div in here. There's not. So don't worry about surround with, just cut it out. So Control X, cut, and we'll say div class equals call dash md dash 10. And then inside there, we'll put our team members. Now let's run this again, still on this page, and see if that doesn't make things look a little better. And there we go. Now we have our labels on the left-hand side, and all of these are justified, left justified, but in a 10-column wide section in case they're needed to be that wide. And now we have checkboxes that actually work. We can select multiple. We can even click on the person's name, like Bob Hope. I click here, it selects Bob Hope. Do it again, it unselects him. So that's a very nice feature that some developers overlook when you're developing HTML. And so the only place you can ever select a checkbox is inside that little checkbox. Now, I think that by and large, the checkbox needs to be fixed for the web because there's not really great styling that you can apply to it. In fact, typically what you do in this situation is use some JavaScript and hide the actual checkbox and put instead a couple of different icons to make it look like it's a bigger, bolder checkbox, maybe a green check mark or a red check mark or something like that. But it is what it is. And we're not going to get too far down the rabbit hole of HTML or CSS either. We're trying to avoid JavaScript. We're also trying to avoid too much HTML and CSS because that's not really what the scope of this course is all about. So just know for aesthetics purposes, I would probably change those checkboxes to be a little more visually appealing before I push this to production. But they are functional. They do work. So we can now successfully at least populate this form. And now the next step is actually creating the team when it comes through this model. The first thing I want to do is we talked about adding that anti-forgery token. And so I want to do that here, and we'll also put it back on the people controller as well. So that's really simple. It just says validate anti-forgery token, and it's a method. And that's inside square braces. That's all there is to it. That right there validates that this form post came from your page and not somebody else's page that's simulating your page. So we'll put that here as well. You put it over the post methods, not the get methods, because the post is where the actual data is coming in. You can never be too careful when it comes to taking data from users. They're notorious for giving you bad data or even maliciously manipulated data. And so you want to make sure that if at all possible, you can eliminate or at least greatly reduce those chances by doing some of these things. And this one right here, it's more of an edge case than it is a common everyday occurrence, but at the same time, it's one of those or you'll need to get possibly a third party. I'm not even sure if there are third party. There probably is. But a third party type tool to help you validate a list. Because what it's going to do is it's not going to validate the way you want it to. Instead, for example, with the selected team members, you'd probably want to say where the count of the list is greater than 0. So at least one person on a team. But that's not really easy to do in this validation method. But there are ways of doing it. So you can do that if you really want to, or you can do it right in here when you say model state is valid. So we can do something like this. We'll leave this down here for now. We'll say if model state is valid and model dot selected team members dot count is greater than 0. And so what that does is it says, make sure the model state's valid, and then here's one more check to do. It's not JavaScript, so it doesn't happen on the client side. It only happens on the server side. So you're passing that data back. But what it does allow is it does allow you to validate that we have at least something selected. So what we'll do here is we will cut this out and we'll paste this in the bottom after we save our team model. But we'll put our else in first and say return view. Remember that return view returns that same create view if it's not valid. That way I can put the stuff back and say, no, fix this. So we'll put that in place, but then we need to do something to save this team model, which is actually not a team model. It's a team MVC model. So let's go back over to this page right here and look at how we actually create the team. And that's this right here. So we'll come back over to our controller, and that's the end result. We want to save the team. So we'll say team model, T equals new team model. But then you got to populate it. So T dot team name equals model dot team name. Simple enough. But now we have to say team dot team members. Now that's kind of a problem because it's expecting a list of person model. We don't have that. And so that's what we're not quite sure of. What do we do here? Well, let's do a little bit of investigation before we go too far down this road. Because I believe we have a little bit of a reprieve here. And so let's look at this create team. We hit F12. That takes us to this, which is our interface. But if we look at the references here for that interface, we find that there's one in the team controller, but there's one in SQL connector. So let's go to that one. And it says, okay, let's look at the list. We insert the team first by grabbing just the team name, and we get back the ID. So there's the ID coming back. Now that we have the ID, for each person in the team members list, we grab just the team ID, or the person ID, I'm sorry. And the team ID up here is what we just captured from creating the team. So guess what we don't need? We don't need first name, last name, email address, or phone number. We don't care. All we care about is the ID. With that being said, what we can do, now let's check one more thing before we go. Let's go back here, go back to our references, and go to the text connector, just to make sure. So we have the teams where it says, okay, the teams count. Let's read this real quick. It grabs all the teams, and it says, give me the ID, the current ID, and then it says teams add the model. And that's the full team model being passed in. So that's a little bit different because it's actually saying just update the ID to be the new team ID and save the entire stinking thing. And if we could actually go here, whoops, not there. And I lost my thread. Let's look at convert people list to string. All it does is for each person in the people list, it grabs the ID. So it took a little more tracking down because that's a little more complex of a logic, but all it's doing is, in both cases, it only cares about the ID of the team. I'm sorry, of the person. And so since it only cares about the ID of the person, we can create a new list with just the ID populated. So let's do that. Let's say model dot selected team members dot select, just like up here, only in reverse really, equals greater than new person model, because team members is a list of person model, open curly braces, and now we can say ID equals, and we can say x dot, well, it's just x because it's a list of string. The problem is that this is actually a string, not an integer. The good news is that that's not really a problem. We can just do int dot parse x because we know it's always going to be an integer inside there. So now it's still yelling at us, but that's because we want to list. And that's it. So we're doing this up here in reverse. We're taking our selected team members, which is a list of string, and we're saying for each one, create a new person model, populate just the ID with the parsed version of the value, which is a string. And we're saying take all those, throw them in a list, put them in the team members, which means the team members is going to be just a series of numbers, which is okay because when we save it, that's all we're looking for. Now when we load it back out to display it again, when it rehydrates the information from the database, it starts with just those ID numbers, but then it says, nah, we need to see more than that. So use these ID numbers to pull in the full names and email addresses and other information about these people. So this create should work. Let's see if it actually does. Okay, let's create a team called the Garanimals. I had too many ands in there. Garanimals. Why? I don't know. And we'll put Tim and Sue on it. And let's add Bob Hope for fun. Because Bob Hope's fun. We hit create. And now we have a new team called the Garanimals with Tim, Corey, Sue Storm, and Bob Hope. So that demonstrates that our create team does work. So everything we needed to do, it does. This list works. It populates properly. If we say create right now, it blows up. That's interesting. It says, nope, you can't do that. So let's continue on with that and see if it works. And it blows up. Let's do it again, and we hit just Joe Smith. We hit create, and now it's going to blow up again. Let's figure out why before we continue. So model is null. All right. So it's saying I can't do a for each on this because the model itself is null, this team MVC model, which seems odd. I don't think that's right. So let's restart this because it doesn't seem like it should work that way. So let's go back. We'll go back to the list, just so we have it. We hit create new. And if I hit create, it crashes. And that's interesting. And this is one of those times, and every once in a while I get an email from somebody saying, oh no, something's gone wrong. Can you help me fix it? And the answer is probably yes. And that's not to brag, it's just because I've seen a lot of these bugs, and a lot of them are just little things. But here's the deal. Debugging is an amazing time to grow your skills. Because here's the deal. When it comes to programming, debugging is a massive part of what you're going to do. And the reason why is not just because you're a bad programmer. It's not. Now, you may write bad programs, and that's a whole nother issue entirely. But the reality is that most likely, if you work for a company, you're going to come in and there's going to be this massive project already in place, and you have to make modifications. And you make even small modifications, things are going to blow up. And the reason why is because you didn't quite understand the relationships, or the 5-layer deep relationships between items, or maybe there's already an existing bug that you kind of just tripped over, or whatever. Debugging. That's where you're going to need to learn to grow, because that's where you're going to spend an awful lot of your time. And the first step I always encourage people to do when they're debugging is stop. Take a minute, breathe, walk away. Take a 5-minute break, go for a glass of water, whatever it takes to just get away from the, oh my word, there's a problem, oh my word, because that doesn't help anything. In fact, your brain needs a couple of seconds, or at least mine does, to catch up with what's going on. And so even sitting here talking to you, my brain is kind of caught up and say, you know what, I've got an idea. And that's where the next step in debugging is great, is if you have an idea, take it one small step at a time. Now I have an idea of why this is happening. And here's why. The model is null. So obviously you can't have model dot something, because null dot something isn't there. So null dot team members doesn't work. All right. So this is null. But when we first run this, it runs no problem. And in fact, let's just demonstrate that we can create a, maybe we'll put T and Tim, Corey, and Sue Storm. Let's call it something else. Let's call it the big group. Just so we have a whole list of people. The big team. We hit create, and it works. And it even populates our whole list, and that's great. So this all works. So why is it that we hit create teams and just hit create that it bombs out? Well, let's go look at what happens in the controller. The other thing I want to point out is we weren't doing any of that validation, and that's because we don't have the bottom of the page that validation token. So let's go ahead and look at our people create page, go to the very bottom, and we just see this section right here for the scripts. We'll just copy that and paste it in down below. So that'll put the jQuery validation in. And before we go any further, let's see how that works, because sometimes making that small change will actually fix something. So if I hit create right now, oh, the team name is required. So I put something in and it blows up again. Why is that? Well, I've got a pretty good idea. So let's put my breakpoint at the very first try. He'll put it right at the beginning. We'll run it again. Oops. Oh well. We'll have to type in /teams. It's okay. Kind of blows up, but let's verify that. So let's step through the code. Step to the end, goes the layout, goes the create, and it starts going through. Now, we'll say yes here, and we'll keep going. In fact, we'll just hit continue because the reality is at this point, we're done kind of stepping through. And it blows up. And it says, nope, I can't find anything in the model. So the problem is this return view right here. And so what I think would probably be a better idea, since it was not a valid state, we might actually want to redirect to our create. Because I'm assuming that's the problem, is we aren't actually coming back to the create. So let's try that. Let's return a redirect action. And we'll redirect right back to create. Now that return view should have done that, but it doesn't seem to have. So let's run this again. I should be over here. Oh well. I'll do it one more time. And again, by the end, we'll put that link in to make it even easier, but I haven't done that yet either. So /teams, create new, test, create, right back where we started. Okay, so that works. It's not the prettiest because that model isn't keeping that name we had here, and it's not giving us a message saying, hey, this is a problem. So that's a problem, or at least it's not as clean cut as I'd like. But I think the issue here is that technically the model state is valid. And so it's not saying it's invalid and capturing or passing back all the information it needs to. So I think that's the problem. This does work. It's just not as slick as we'd like. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and take care of going to the underscore layout in the shared folder instead of views. So views, shared, layout. And let's add that link for teams. Now, do teams come before or after people? Probably let's just put them after for now. We can debate that all we want later. But my thing is get on the page, figure out if it works for you, and then go from there. Because you can spend your whole day trying to debug or figure out what the best way of doing things is when somebody else can just throw it on the page, get it to work, and they're 5 steps ahead of you. So just put something up there, see if it works for you. So teams, create new. We can actually create new. We can go back to our list. We can go to people. We can create new there. Back to our list. Back to home. And it's taking a bit. There we go. So all this works. And it's how you want so far. So with this lesson, we covered how to create a team, including that tricky little bit with the checkboxes. We did a little bit of link, which that's always fun. And we even add that that validation token for validating the anti-forgery token. So again, fun stuff. There's that token right there. It comes out of the box with any template that you create. So fun stuff. It's easy to do so far. And let's move right on to our next lesson. And our next lesson should be just as simple. We're going to create the prizes form. So again, creating prizes and listing prizes. Pretty simple stuff so far. And it's kind of repetitive in some ways because it does similar stuff, but it really is building on each other, and it gets you kind of in that groove of creating something and making some modifications and creating those views and seeing how they interact. So don't go anywhere. Stick around for the next lesson where we create the prizes pages.